That's loud. All right, I'd like to call this January 21st committee meeting of the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission to order. I'm Jim Bledsoe, and I'm chairman of the commission. This time, I'd like to ask everyone to turn their cell phones off or to vibrate. And if you do have to take a call, please step out into the lobby. There's also a tablet being passed around the room. If you would, please sign it and put what group or special interest you're with. That way we'll have a record of your attendance here today. When the committees are meeting, if you want to speak, please come up to the microphone in the middle of the room and state your name and direct all your questions towards either me or the chairman of that committee, and please no communications back and forth with the audience. If you have a topic that's not on the agenda, please wait till the end of the commission meeting, and I'll ask if there be anything else brought before the commission. So we do have a few very special guests in the room. We got former Commissioner Miss Julie Schuster and her husband Darrell. She's with the Tennessee Wildlife Foundation, and former Chairman Mr. Commissioner Jeff Griggs. Thank you, sir. You can get up and speak anytime you want to, or you can sit back there and stay thirsty, my friend. We also have Mr. Mike Butler from the Tennessee Wildlife Federation is here, and we've got some lovely wives and friends in the room. Miss Vicki Swan, it's very nice to meet you, and Miss Cindy, as always, is good, and Kim Wilson, you're Connie's friend, and assistant, okay, and Dr. Cook's wife, Lisa. Sorry, I apologize for that. Terrible with names, but we thank everybody for being here, and we're going to get rolling on this. Miss Barbara, would you please call the roll?
Chad Baker.
Here.
Jim Bledsoe.
Here.
Harold Cannon.
Here.
Jeff Cook.
Here.
Bill Cox.
Here.
Kurt Holbert.
Here.
Connie King.
Here.
Jeff McMillan.
Here.
Jim Ripley. Bill Swan.
Here.
Trey Teague.
Here.
David Watson.
Here.
Jamie Woodson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Miss Barbara. I have one announcement I'd like to get at. Are you ready? Okay. I have one announcement that's due to the inclement weather, the full commission meeting tomorrow will be rolled until Friday, February the 12th in Nashville. The committees will meet today, and then we will have a continuation. The agenda items, including the rulemaking hearing slated for tomorrow, will be rolled until the February 12th meeting in Nashville, with the exception of the nominating committee, which I will appoint today. We apologize for any inconvenience, but the weather's going to hit tonight, and none of us are from Memphis, and we've got to drive home, and it's going to be rough. So hope you please understand, and like I said, sorry again for the inconvenience. Thank you. Director Carter, do you have anything at this moment?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir. Any announcements from the commission right now? All right, I'd like to recognize Nick Crafton. He's a Memphis resident. He's wanting to say a few words about the Hatchie Scenic River. Nick?
Yes, I'm Nick Crafton. I'm a chemical engineer, born and raised here in Memphis. And I wanted to reflect back 2 years ago. Chairman Griggs allowed at the meeting in Jackson in 2014, we talked about the Hatchie River and some plans there that I don't think were well thought out for workforce and other needs. But I want to tell you how proud I am for the public and for our director and the Commissioner Cox and Teague from the area. We were able to turn back that plan that was to put 1 billion gallons of industrial wastewater into the Hatchie Scenic River. Our Hatchie Scenic River was protected since before the Federal Clean Water Act. by the Dunn administration. And so I want to thank David McKinney and Rob Todd for the very important technical argument. And to this day, I don't know what tipped the scale, but we had the public, which many of you helped initiate, and certainly Mike Butler with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. So there was a public effort, a legal effort, and then the scientific and biological effort. So all three of those came to bear. In August of 2015, they have withdrawn that application. So it was a big turnaround, and I'm thankful to everybody for all the good work and all the spreading of the word. We don't like to cry wolf and raise the flag and blow a lot of hot air when it's not necessary. So the timing was just perfect, and it got the job done. And I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crafton. Really appreciate concerned citizens. So, thank you. Moving on into the committees. Oh, wait a minute. I got one thing back up. I'm sorry. Like to, is Lieutenant Wade Hendren here today? Would you please come up and give us an update on the little boy that was missing and how we're working with that?
Yes, sir. Thank you. My name is Wade Hendren. I'm the District 11 Lieutenant. Thursday, a week ago in Chester County, there was a little 2-year-old child, Noah Chamberlain, that went missing in the woods. And Chester counties are the terrain is really rough. And we had about 3 or 4 from our district that went and assisted the first day, which was last Friday, for several hours. On Monday of this week, Major Brian Thompson went to the command post and asked if they needed any assistance. And it's been hundreds of volunteers that have been there for several days, some 24 hours a day searching. So within about a 3-hour span, he sent out a mass email to Region 1, and it was strictly for all volunteers that wished to help. With that being said, he gave us a time and a place to meet on Tuesday morning. When I got out of my truck, it was 18 degrees Tuesday morning. And with all the volunteers that showed up, it was amazing because nothing was mandatory. It was the coldest day of the year, as bad of conditions as you can get, and we had no idea what we were getting into. With all the volunteers that showed up, it would make the hair stand up on the back of your neck to see all the wildlife agency trucks pull up. And I can't call names because I'll leave somebody out, but it was approximately 40 of our agency employees, and it ranged everywhere from technicians to the wildlife division to area managers to law enforcement. And this was in conjunction with the Tennessee Highway Patrol. We walked for 9 hours that day. It was so cold that our bottled water that we carried in our pockets froze. And nobody ever batted an eye. And when I mean it was bloodshed that day, you could look to your right and left at any given time, and people that was going through this terrain, briars, it was so thick that each of us, anywhere you look, we were literally bleeding from our ears, nose, everywhere because of cuts, bruises, scratches. And if my child was lost in the woods, the first call would be to someone that works for this wildlife agency, no matter what your position is, because you can't teach what we know about the outdoors in books. You don't learn that in school. And everybody's skill set with outdoors is so far advanced. And I would like to just give praise to our employees and give Director Carter and his staff us the latitude that we can, when this situation presents itself, that we can kind of go outside the box and assist this family in this type of situation. We covered approximately 1,000 acres that day in a 9-hour span. And that's a pretty good area. And we found no evidence, but that day was mainly for law enforcement or our type personnel, along with the highway patrol, to gather any type of, as a last hurrah, evidence that we could. We found none, but I'd like to thank the commission, ladies and gentlemen, the commission also to give us that latitude to kind of, to go as needed when it presents itself, to let us help in this type of situation. I hope I didn't leave anybody out because I didn't name names. I named people of the agency, but my thanks goes out to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Wade. We're really proud of our boys, and our hearts and prayers go out to the little boy and the family, and hope we come up with some good news sometime or another. Moving on, we're going to move into the Wildlife Management Committee. Before I turn it over to Chairman McMillan, Tim Churchill is not here today, so if you're looking at the agenda, we're going to roll those proclamations to the Friday meeting, Friday, February the 12th meeting in Nashville. So, Chairman Jeff McMillan.
Thank you, Chairman Bledsoe. This time I'm going to ask Chief of Wildlife Mark Gudlin to come up and give us an update on our past seasons for big game.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleased to be here this afternoon to give you just a brief update with some of the preliminary figures for hunting season success for several of our high-profile wildlife game species. And I'll begin with the bear. This year, in Zone 3 was the last season to close, and that closed January 2nd, so there's probably a few tags that we still haven't received, but right now the figure we have is a harvest of 547 bears. So just look at the graph on the right, and you'll see that is the third highest harvest that we've had over the last 10 years. We've seen general trend and increase in our bear harvests. Typically, we have our high harvest years when there's a poor mass crop production. Bears come down, they cover a lot more ground, foraging, and are more available for harvest. And that's what we saw in bear country in East Tennessee. Some of the other things to note in the harvest: we had our first recorded harvest in Granger and Hancock County, one bear each. Also, the Appalachian Bear Rescue took in the second highest number of orphan cubs this year at 38. And the female harvest was 36% of the total bear harvest. Looking at the figures over the last 10 years, a little hard to see. 36% was actually the lowest that we had, but well within the range of what we would expect. Again, not exposing females to any further, any more significant harvest than is normally seen. Zone 4, this was the second year that the Zone 4 was open on the plateau there, and had an expected high harvest there also of 54 bears. Was 15 last year, and this is an archery-only zone. It is intended to help alleviate nuisance issues in years like this, and similarly, Zone 1, we've seen fluctuating harvests of 14 to 127 over the last 8 years, and that's the zone in kind of the orange color in the northeast part in the Tri-Cities area. Also, as a result of the high number of nuisance incidents in Gatlinburg, the city council there has agreed to distribute bear-wise literature citywide prior to the next tourist season. Dan Gibbs and a lot of the Region 4 crew and Region 3 have been working with the effort with other states on the bear awareness program that's known as Bear-Wise, and it's, I think, really great the number of ways that they're looking at putting signs and posters and other notices, trying to make people more conscious and aware of bears and how to avoid incidents. Before I move on to Sandhill cranes, are there any questions that you might have on bears?
The bear hunt Zone 4 up there, were those like the largest bears in the state? I know several people around home there kill some that's in excess of 500 pounds. So I was just...
I really don't know.
I was just making a joke about it. We grow them bigger up there on the plateaus. So.
I think they're eating chickens, aren't they?
Yeah, they eat chickens. So.
Do you have a breakdown, Mark, of the bears that were taking archery gun and dog hunts? Do you have a breakdown of that?
No, I don't have that breakdown at this point.
Can you have that for the February meeting, please?
Sure.
Okay. Are any other questions concerning the bears? All right.
Okay. Moving on to Sandhill cranes, preliminary figures. Now, this is the third year of our experimental seasons. As of right now, we had 113 birds reported in the harvest. This is significantly lower. The first year was 350 Sandhill cranes, and the second year was 393. The reason why we're seeing this decreased harvest is that because of the unusually warm weather that we had in December, the birds just didn't migrate down here really until about the first of the year. So there weren't significant number of birds around to be harvested. And that season did end on January 1st. Also, because of the change in the way the Fish and Wildlife Service is conducting the season setting, we will actually be setting these seasons for the migratory birds at the March and April commission meetings, and sometime prior to that, Joe Benedict, our migratory game bird coordinator, will be in communication with you on the interim season that will be coming, and then the full operational season that we will have in 2017. Because of the way the calendar fell, the data analysis that the Fish and Wildlife Service requires, we didn't go straight from an experimental to a full operational season that we will have as a permanent season. So we will have an interim season next year where we have the option to increase the number of days and number of permits only. And our Sandhill Crane team has met, and they've been discussing various options for you to consider to try to make a smooth transition from the slightly expanded interim season to the fully operational season that we will have.
Question?
Mark,
Sure.
very quickly, this is also going to be the first year that we're going to get the waterfowl season dates early, I believe, and that is it February or March, to where we'll actually be able to act on all hunting matters at
Correct.
the
Yeah, we'll be
March, April meeting. Is that
right. The Fish and Wildlife Services has made that change. Well, they will actually look at last year's data to be able to set the next fall's season, because previously there was such a short time before getting all the breeding population data, having to crunch that, the short amount of time before the harvest or the hunting seasons would have to be set. They worked with the states to develop that system, and I think it'll be beneficial in a lot of ways. We'll have a lot more lead time on getting those dates available so people can schedule their hunts and us be a little more ready for that. Any other questions on cranes?
Yeah,
Yes,
wasn't the U.S. Fish and Wildlife recommendation for Sandhills like 750 statewide for 3 years? That was their original recommendation, and we cut it back to the Hiwassee area in 400. Is that correct?
trying to remember the 774. We had it.
Whatever the number was, it was a
Yeah, we-
statewide number for almost twice what we ended up seeing.
Correct. It was a total of 2,323 birds that could be taken. We decided to bundle it in 400 permits, and so 400 people could get drawn, and you would be able to kill 3 sandhill cranes with each
Right. Well,
permit.
my question is, if their recommendation was for a statewide season at 700 odd permits, at 3 birds per permit, and we elected to cut it back for this 3-year experimental season or trial season, what's the justification for having an interim season? I don't understand why we can't at least go back to what their original recommendation was. Why do we have to have a smaller interim season? Why can't we just go to the full recommendation from the first year?
Director Carter, would you?
Director, I wasn't here when that decision was made.
when the Fish and Wildlife Service first came out with their parameters of what we could do, they did give us a total number of permits that we could go forward with and the number of birds in total. And we arrived at the smaller parameters the commission put in place, primarily because it was the first year, it was going to be a 3-year experimental season, and that's what the Fish and Wildlife Service required. There were some things we couldn't change. We did have the zone down there. We weren't ready to go to a statewide at that point, but under the parameters that we're with, you can come back. We have to go 4 years now instead of 3 on the experimental season. So we have to stay within inside those same parameters that they gave us originally. But under this new season setting that's coming up in March and April, you will be able to expand the number of permits. You could go to a larger zone. There are several things you can do, but you'll still be inside that experimental season framework.
I think someone said this week that is there a WMA in West Tennessee that had approximately 6,000 Sandhill crane birds on it? Which WMA was that? I'm sorry?
Hop-in refuge.
Okay. So is that unusually high for West Tennessee to see that many birds, or do you know?
I'm Alan Peterson in Region 1. I think, if I remember correctly, he's had more than that in years past. That's close to the average, but my memory is not as good as it used to be, but I think he's had up to 12,000 before. Don't quote me on that, but we get a lot. That's the one place we get a lot of birds.
Awesome. Is the problem as far as the number of birds that we're harvesting in the Hiwassee refuge area, is it still because of the lack of private land to hunt on? Is that the biggest? Would there be a problem in West Tennessee around that one? That WMA, is there a lot of private land that, I'm sorry.
That's right. I need the exercise. We're still trying to figure out exactly how we what we would recommend for hunts if we expanded to West Tennessee. Most of the hunting would have to take place on private land, and the hunters that got drawn would have to have permission to hunt on those private. So it's difficult. We'll work through a lot of different options and figure out what we think is best. So,
Okay. Is there any other questions from the commission about Sandhills?
One thing I found interesting is we hunted between Christmas and New Year's, and Ben and Dinah Layton hunted the same morning. We had lunch with them. They had not gotten one single response card back in the mail by almost the first of the year. And we were talking about for next year, maybe not starting the season so early and letting it run on into January. I mean, that was a suggestion that Ben and Diana and I talked about.
I think part of the reason the season was set when it was not to conflict with the Crane Festival, correct? So I think we still probably need to be sensitive to that, but just have to go from there. Any other questions on Sandhills, comments? All right, move on, Mark.
Okay. All right, moving on to deer. Again, these are preliminary figures. We probably have 95% or more of the figures in at this point. And looking at the statewide deer harvest, total number of deer taken, just a small difference between 2014 and this past season, a 1.5% increase. Actually looking at the average of the harvest over the last 5 years, it was 167,720. So we're actually only a couple hundred below. So looking at the last 5 years basically is a very stable total deer harvest. We'll look at some of these figures broken down in a few other ways. Looking at it on all bucks harvested versus all does harvested. Again, really not much difference. Looking at the difference between last year when it was a 3-buck limit and this year the 2-buck limit, down 6% in the total number of bucks harvested and up 11% on the does. When you look at, you'll also see the white. Oops, let me get back in there. The figures in white up at the top of each bar are the total number of deer. There's also a percentage figure in there, so if you look up and down the graph, you look and see that there was, in 2014, 58% of the harvest was bucks and 42% was does. Looking at that between the 2 years, very similar numbers, well within what you'd expect in variation from one year to the next. And looking at antler deer, the antler deer in this case being those that had at least one antler more than 3 inches in length versus the antlerless harvest, which would be the rest, including does, buck fawns, and bucks with with both antlers less than 3-inch antlers. Again, very similar numbers to what we had last year in 2014, and also not just between the total numbers, but also in the percent breakdown. So in reality, no change there. Breaking down the antlered bucks into the age structure, just a very slight difference in the 2.5 and 3.5-year-old figures, but again, bottom line, essentially no difference between last year and this year. Looking at overall hunter success, we did see an increase of more hunters killing a deer this year than last year. 4,425 more hunters had success in killing at least one deer. As you would expect, looking at the bottom of the graph there, as far as those people that harvested 3 bucks, in order to do that legally now, you would have to have a bonus buck, so we would expect that would have dropped quite a bit. Column on the right is the difference, so we did see, again, that jump in the number of people that harvested one deer. Looking at strictly at the antlerless buck harvest, those, not counting button bucks in here, but those with the visible antlers less than 3 inches. This is the one place in looking at the data that we did see something. It may or may not mean anything at this point, just looking at 1 year, but we did see a pretty significant decrease in the number of antlerless bucks that were harvested. You know, whether it's just an anomaly or whether it was intentional, that we had a lot of hunters that may have looked at those deer before and knowing they were able to kill 3 bucks, kind of looked at it as a mistake buck. You know, well, if I shoot and if it's legal, I still have 2 more chances to, get another antler deer. They may have been a little more cautious on pulling the trigger. So we'll have to look at that over the next several years and see if that's any kind of a trend or, again, an anomaly. We also did look at the number of deer with 4, 5, and 6 points, which typically are going to fall into your 1.5-year-old age class deer. And there was a decline in those numbers. However, there has been a steady decline since 2012. Again, those are the only things we've been the only 2 things we've been able to pull out that seem to be much different between this year and 2014 or versus the overall averages. But the final breakdown and further analysis of those figures will be given to you during the season setting process, of course, being in April and May. With that, are there any deer questions you might have?
Kurt?
Yeah. Mark, that number is intriguing, but I had several people call me, and I have to wonder if that's part of the reason that number is people tagged those deer as button bucks, because they were concerned that if they tagged that deer as an antlered deer, even though it was too small, that it was still going to count against them. I had several people actually tell me they did that because they were scared that if they went ahead and tagged that as an antlered deer, even though it was below the minimum, even though you put in 0 points, that it would still count against them. So I have to wonder if that's why one reason that number is so low is because a lot of people tagged them as button bucks. I don't know if your button bucks went up. Do you know if that number went up?
Just slightly. It was button bucks went up 121 more this year than last year. But of course, if it had both antlers less than 3 inches, it would be antlerless and would not count against their
Yeah, I think
Two
the
buck
public,
limit.
I think the public
somewhat confused on that
somewhat
part.
confused on that, so.
Okay.
But, just thinking out loud here, the people that check those deer in, I mean, on their mobile app or whatever, how much trouble would it be to take a picture of that deer and tag it with that check-in? I mean, that would, if we required them to do that, I mean, Michael could probably handle that on the IT if you want to get up here, but I mean, if it was part of the mobile check-in, I mean, because if you've got a phone that's going to be able to get on the internet, it should have a camera on it that you could take a picture of that deer and send it in with your check-in.
Yeah, Michael May, Chief of IT. We were looking at that as a possibility when we created that and designed it 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. It was not really an option with the team, the vendor that we were using on the reel system side. The way that we created that mobile app is it's two vendors. We have a native mobile app vendor who created the shell of the app, and then we have the vendor who manages the reel system, that those two link together. So when you go and you purchase your license or you harvest, it will go out to, that mobile app will go out to that portion. We'll reach out to that vendor's side and do it. So that is the vendor that I'm talking about who manages the reel system. To be able to have that function that way was not really something we could do. But we're looking at that here, hopefully, maybe this year, and see if we can do that. And I will add real quick on, we're talking about the antlerless portion. On the way that it is right now, there's a section on the mobile harvest that you have to click on there that you understand that this is a less than 3-inch. So when you click that, it states on there that you will not be, it won't go against your buck limit. So it's on the mobile app portion.
I love the convenience of the mobile app, but I mean, we miss a lot of data by not having a physical check-in, I guess. I mean, because we're relying a lot on, like he said, the 5 and 6 pointers are probably your younger bucks, and if we had an actual point where they take it to a point of sale, I guess you get that data.
Yeah, we definitely looked at that as an option early on. We just couldn't do it at that point in time, and we're looking at it now.
Michael, on that, on the website where you're checking your deer in, and you can go to the bottom and actually record a picture of your deer.
On the internet or the mobile?
On the mobile.
That is the trophy section that we've got that Jason manages. We can still do that, but it's not a mandatory thing.
Can we put a disclaimer or something on there if they go to that says this is not, you're not checking your deer in by this or something? Because we've had that happen this year, that people think they're checking their deer in by taking a picture of it, they say. So I'm just saying, I think it'd be advisable to put something on that part of the, if they go to that saying this is not where you check your deer in, if the deer's not checked in, please go to.
Yeah,
Can we do that?
that.
Is that hard to do?
No, we can do
All right,
that.
I think we ought to do that. That way it'll eliminate people saying they've checked their deer in by taking a picture of it.
Had no idea that would happen. We can take care of that.
It happened, didn't it? So I got calls, people upset about saying that they did check it in, but all they done is take. I'm just saying, I think it'd be good to clarify that.
No, that won't be difficult to do. We can take care of that.
It'd be great. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
Believe it? Yeah, East Tennessee's not all stupid, but it. Yes, sir, Kurt.
Do you have the number of antlerless deer that was killed on the last 5 days that we extended season?
No, I do not.
Okay.
But we can have those figures for you at the next commission meeting.
Be great.
This is kind of getting, it's about deer, but it's not on the number subject. I'll let him get his notes wrote down there. I know everybody in here is probably very well aware of it, but we had for the public, we had a incident that very rarely happens, I guess, and we had to kind of scramble to get something done on it. We had, where the Mississippi River was flooding, some of the Unit A counties along the Mississippi River from the Kentucky line down to Obion County, we had an emergency call session and closed the juvenile season because the deer were all pushed and congregated into a real tight area, and it was was not gonna be the most ethical hunt, I guess, and we were worried about public safety too, but I just kinda like to get some public output there that we would like some direction from the agency for a process for emergency closures. Me being the chairman, if it was I had to call an emergency phone conference, and we followed all the channels that we thought were correct, but if some of the other states have already got processes in place, and it's just not necessarily for floods, it's for other instances, but I just kind of like for the agency to come back with us before our season setting with kind of a plan for a process for emergency closures. If anybody else wants to weigh in on that, so.
Don't certain states have just directly a flood level when the Mississippi River gets to a certain height, it just automatically happens?
They do. The ones that I'm aware of, Commissioner, are only directed at floods, and we can certainly take that into account, but there are other things that have occurred in the past, everything from droughts to fires and other things that probably should be looked at as well. So, but yeah, there are some emergency closures that Missouri and Arkansas both have.
Yeah, this change subject. We have seen, or at least I have, and I'm sure everybody has seen some nice bucks killed this year. And I wonder if, and I guess this is aimed at Don, and if you're not getting them, we need to figure out how you can, but if the deer, pictures of these big bucks, are we doing anything to capture those and put them in news releases and get it out there that what's going on in Tennessee, like you see Kentucky and Iowa and all these other places? I mean, we're killing some pretty nice bucks, and if it's there, I've missed it in our social media and our news releases.
We've implemented a couple of new things with the tag board and with the trophy room that Jason's kept up for a couple of years, and just try to push those out as much as we can. So we'll look to share those when we're on Facebook and on the social side. And I think that will be a lot of good. Markham's energy will be focused on the social side of our press releases and getting the news out there and sharing it that way. So I will pass that along to you.
Yes, sir.
Something along those lines, have we ever considered reaching out to some of the taxidermists so they maybe could contact us if they receive a, exceptional deer and the hunter is willing to, be in a picture with it? That might be a good opportunity, because obviously the taxidermists in the state, they're the ones that see them, and that might be a good way to capture pictures and pictures of a quality that's actually usable for us. I had something else going back, Mark. It may or may not have been in there, but is there a chart that shows? I know there's a chart that shows the buck harvest, and then a chart that said that the success rate was up. Was it 9,000, almost 10,000 hunters were successful, more than the year before? Does that tell us? I guess it probably does. My thoughts were, how many of those, this bucks? Yeah, this is all bucks. Okay, so that's 9,752 bucks.
No, that's not bucks, that's the number of people killed in there, isn't it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is that antler deer or is that bucks?
Those are just the antlered bucks. The number at the top was hunters killing any deer.
That was one of the things I thought could possibly be a result of lowering the buck limit, that we may not necessarily kill a substantial amount less, but that the harvest might be spread out amongst more hunters. So I think that's a good trend if it continues.
Yeah, it's another point that you make, that it would support that theory.
That's it. Thanks.
Any other questions for Mark? Thank you, Mark.
One last thing that I was asked to was to give an update also on